Well, thank you for coming. It's lovely to see everybody. I guess we're all Who fans, right?
Yep.
So there's nothing for me to say. You know everything. We're done. If you came the other day, we talked more about the effect of the program on race and culture in America and how American television has been affected by it. For today, I want to focus more deeply on the two writers of the program that, of course, I did mention the other day, right? And that's Russell Davies and Stephen Moffat. So one of the things I focus on right up front is this book, which I have a copy of over there. I highly recommend it if you're a real fan and you're interested in the writing of television. Because what it is a journalist, Benjamin Cook, asked Russell T. Davies, could I email you across the course of the season as you're gaining ideas for the show? Could I just ask you what you're thinking about, say, at noon on a Friday night? And Russell Davies said, sure, that'd be fine. And so he would talk about the genesis of his ideas, starting from the idea of, I want to do an episode where water is dangerous, and suddenly we have Waters of Mars, right? How do you do that? What is that writer's process? So that's what this book is all about. They published literally their emails to each other as they discussed and debated each episode of the last season. And so I think it's quite a marvelous book to talk about the art of writing. And writing, what a beautiful thing to talk about in a library, because we're full of books here, right? And even television has become more and more recently considered more of an art form than it was back in the day. It used to be movie writers would do TV because they couldn't get a job doing movies. Now, TV is a well sought after job because of the kinds of people that we're going to talk about today, who begin with Russell T. Davies, right? When people talk about television, I get them to try to look at what were your favorite episodes of a program. Now go to IMDb and find out who wrote those episodes. And now look at the rest of their career. What else have they written that you might enjoy? Because clearly they speak to you. Their voice speaks to you. So the idea of this particular talk is to look at the two major writers, one who I just said is Russell, and the other who we all know is Stephen Moffat. All right? We're going to talk about a couple of themes that recur in their work, and I think make the show more interesting in this reboot, right, that came to us in 2005. Both of them have different strengths, which I find interesting as a person who studies television writing. And there are reasons why we like and dislike certain things that they do. So I think that's the fun thing about what's going on here. Right now, Russell Davies is the reason we have Doctor Who in this period. Did you know it's because he created a show called Queer as Folk? And this show was so incredibly popular in the UK that the BBC came to him and said, you can do whatever you like next. And whatever he liked was regenerating Doctor Who, which shocked everybody, right? And last time I went over the whole history of Doctor Who, and if you don't know it, but you know, it's been around since 1963, it faded in the late 80s, and he brought it back. That's the strength of one writer, and the strength of the message that he had. Now, coming off of Queer Folk, there was some fear that he would make too many changes to the program. He would do something that startled people, like perhaps create a gay doctor. Well, he didn't do that because he wanted to stay true to the concept of the show, which was that originally it was meant to be a cheesy children's program. Maybe it wasn't meant to be cheesy, but that's what happened with a low budget back in the day, right? So he was going to bring it back as an adult program, and as we know, Rose was the first episode that introduced the Doctor back to us, and that's played by Christopher Eccleston. But he was counteracting what people thought of in the 70s and 80s if they happened to watch Doctor Who. You got cheesy costume characters. This was the Candyman. In case you just, yeah, exactly. You think to yourself, now I could do better, you know, most kids who do cosplay, you could do a better costume yourself. And this was the professional status when we talk about the 60s and 70s, all right? Or, for instance, fish people. Walking fish people, not exactly the height of science fiction. This is what Doctor Who meant to the BBC and what meant to most people at that time. So Davies came in and said, I'm going to make this mature without taking away the excitement and the family ability to watch. That was his goal originally, all right? And I would have to say that he largely succeeded, because this is an OBE, Order of the British Empire. And Russell T. Davies is one of the first openly gay men to receive this from the Queen because of his work in recreating Doctor Who, which of course the English believe sends their culture out to the masses, which it does, right? I mean, when they do history, they generally do British history, European history. They're not worried about Paul Revere and George Washington, which is what you would do if the program was based in America. So the OBE is a sign of the height of his success, I would have to say, especially in the face of the fact that I think, Elton John has one, but not too many other openly gay men have received this. So that's a pretty big deal. Now, what's funny is, this is a BAFTA. This is what Stephen Moffat got. So far, Stephen doesn't have an OBE. We can't be handing them out to everybody, or they would be like, not so important. But a BAFTA is pretty good, and Stephen has several of those from writing some early Doctor Who's under the tutelage of Russell T Davies. And so that makes a difference in where his ideas came from and when he was unleashed, what new ideas he was able to bring to the Whoniverse. But so these men are both very accomplished in their world today. We would have to say they're two of the highest rated English writers in UK television as it stands. What's interesting to me is Stephen we most know from Blink, which is the episode that he created and he won his first BAFTA for. And it's quite the scary thing. What Stephen likes to do, if you think about recurring themes, is Stephen likes to find the fearful things in everyday life. He doesn't want to invent cheesy fish monsters. He's not worried about Godzilla, who I hope isn't so bad in this current creation, but we can't be sure. Can't say anything until we see it. He wants to invent fear in everyday life. And so this was a perfect example of it because, of course, what's the rule of Blink? Don't blink. Blink or you die. Oh my God, how do you not blink? All right, how is it? So that's right away just makes you crazy. All right, that tension, and that really makes you scared of something so normal. It's fascinating. So Stephen is quite an interesting writer when it comes to that. What's funny is Davies is the one who I think came away with the more deep messages. The more mature, if you will, concepts came from his work. One of them that I find constantly recurring, and I think drew many of us to the show, coming out in 2005, when the world was involved in a couple of very bad wars, and still we are, to some extent, correct? I think Davies' first message, they were afraid his message was going to be openly gay, which it wasn't. But it is very inclusive, and we did talk about that last time, and we'll briefly touch on that again. I think the deepest theme you find in Russell T Davies' work is his anti-war theme. I think if you look at the first episodes, especially with Eccleston, but as they're later repeated with David Tennant, and we're going to see a little clip from each of those, you find an amazingly deep anti-war strain because of what war does to human beings, what it turns them into. And that's something that an artist, a writer, dislikes. Because an artist wants to see someone succeed through their creativity and through bringing something important and positive into the world. One of the things I said last time was I do believe the reason that Who succeeds now at such a level is because it's a positive view of our future. As much as you all might like to see zombies eating people and getting shot in barns and all that sort of thing, those are very depressing looks at our potential future. In Doctor Who, the Doctor generally wins, and his goal is generally to save humanity. I like that. I would rather live in a future where I get saved than where I turn into a zombie, right? So I think that's really important. So this is a clip from Dalek, which was the 6th episode of the first season with Christopher Eccleston. So in Dalek, as you might know, the history that he gave to this Doctor as he's returning is that he is the only survivor of the Time War, and the awful, terrible guys he was against were the Daleks, who have been the bad guys from the very beginning. What's a really funky piece of trivia is the Daleks were invented by the same guy who came to America and invented MacGyver. Yeah, MacGyver and Doctor Who are connected in this fashion. I always love that. So the Daleks were an early on bad guy, and here Eccleston is attacking the Dalek for the effects of war on the Dalek, all right? So let's see how he feels about that. So not only are humans bothered by war, right? Other creatures are. Now you gotta watch the whole episode. But think about how beautiful that clip is, all right? Think about the concept here. I'm as bad as my worst enemy because the war made me that way, and yet I'm supposed to be the hero. That's a pretty amazingly deep message for a cheesy TV show, all right? That's a pretty strong message for someone. It ranks right up there. And it doesn't matter what war you're talking about. If we're talking about a real war like the Civil War, if we're talking about a real war like the current war, this is the same outcome. You're alone. People you love die. War is bad. Forget that war is all hell shit. War is bad, all right? This is a deep message for Russell Davies, and I think, right. Now, that was Eccleston, who I did happen to like. He only does the Doctor for 1 year, but he's a very intense Doctor, right? I highly recommend he plays Iago in a lovely version of Othello that they do on BBC as well, which we have copies of in the IGE department. But he's quite a brilliant actor, and it was a big thing when he offered to come back and do the show. But we don't, a theme for a writer doesn't end after 1 or 2 episodes. Tennessee Williams, who's a famous playwright, if you haven't studied him yet, you should check him out. He once said that all writers work from the themes of the first 6 years of their life, which I think is quite a fascinating concept. If you think about the emotions you experienced most intensely in your first 6 years, right? And Russell T. Davies will say that even though he was a child post-World War II, he was living in a world that was giving up rationing and remembering how to get back to normal, and the threat, the feeling that war had done this to them stayed with him. That's his childhood memory. So he plays that constantly. Now, he didn't end with that theme just because Eccleston left the show. He continues the theme now into, of course, David Tennant's tenure. And David, some people, his favorite Doctor. It all depends. There's so many Doctors. I still like Peter Davison best. So if you have time, you have to go back to Classic Who and check out Peter. And Tom, you could be here for years binge watching this program. That's all right. This particular clip is from Gridlock, and he's remembering the glory of the Time Lords and how they've been lost. I think that's a particularly important piece of business because he's talking about what gets lost during wartime. Right? You lose the places that mean the most to you. And again, you go back to the concept of when we're thinking about the Civil War and the way the South was destroyed, the very people that tried to create their own world, their own country, destroyed it in the process. So what's the purpose of war? It's useless, right? And so this is a deep message for Russell T. Davies. Now, the other message that most people recognize and see when they see Russell's work, from Queer as Folk all the way through even Sarah Jane Adventures, which was a spin-off of Doctor Who that was created, which is quite a fun show if you haven't seen it, quite fun. Obviously, he was about inclusion, and we're going to talk about feminism, and we're going to talk about including gay characters on a regular basis in programs. He said in a marvelous interview that when he was a child and he watched television, he didn't see himself. He understood that he only saw men and women kissing, and this didn't seem to show him that he belonged in the future at any point. So when he created Captain Jack Harkness, who's played by John Barrowman, who is, I think I said last time, basically the Neil Patrick Harris of England. He's a musical star, and he's quite wonderful, and everybody loves him. He came in as Captain Jack Harkness. And that was a really interesting character. He was a time traveler, but he's not a time lord. He's omnisexual. He has sex with aliens, men, women, anybody who's free. All right? So that was kind of an open thing that you're able to do in science fiction. How much fun is that? But Davies knew as a child he didn't need to see a guy dancing with an alien. He wanted to see a man dancing with another man. He wanted to know that the little younger people watching this program would see that as a perfectly natural thing. So in fact, Captain Jack comes to us from World War II, but he's a time traveler, so he lives forever. But he goes back in this particular episode into a flashback, and he meets the man whose name he stole, the actual Captain Jack Harkness, because he needed a fake name, right? And it's the night before, because he knows all time, because he's traveled through it, it's the night before the actual Captain Jack is going to die in battle. And our Captain Jack knows this is his last night on Earth, and that the real Captain Jack from World War II is gay. And he will never have the experience of being publicly able to show his emotions to another man, except he's going to do it tonight. Oh, I'm crying. That was so good. But when do you get to see that, all right? Now, by the way, I forgot to say that wasn't Doctor Who, that was Torchwood, because once he invented Captain Jack on Doctor Who, he knew that he couldn't go with some of those themes. They are more mature themes for a family program, so that's what he created Torchwood for, right? Which is why I have the book on Torchwood, because I was more interested in those themes emerging from his work. Anyway, we did talk briefly about this, but we'll cover it again just so that we're new folks. The other thing that Russell Davies is known for that has bled into American television better and makes everybody happy is colorblind casting, right? This business, again, of inclusion. In America, as I said, sadly, when you have a black and a white person together in a relationship, the problem in their life is that one of them's black and one of them's white. But after a while, that's not your problem anymore, or the relationship wouldn't work. So in his case, he gave us Mickey and Rose in the very first episode, and through that first couple of seasons, we're going to watch their relationship. Sadly, she eventually falls out of love with Mickey and into love with the Doctor. All right, well, it's David Tennant. Who wouldn't fall in love with him? All right, what can I tell you? But he gives us not one time. It's a recurring thing in Davies's work. We get to the next Doctor episode, and we see Jackson Lake and his partner, who once the episode is over, we understand they're falling in love and they're probably going to get married, even though they live in Victorian England, and that is going to be taken in a particular way. Although Belle, that new movie coming out now, is dealing with a biracial woman in this era. So that's going to end. It's based on a true story. So I'm very excited to see how that's going to work out, right? But he also did this in little moments in episodes. Again, I'm back to Blink, which was written by Stephen Moffat, but under the executive producership of Russell T Davies, who made sure that Detective Inspector Billy Shipton, who gets to say the really great line, "Life is short and you are hot," he's hot, all right? But they put him together with Carey Mulligan. That's who he gets to be in love with, and she in love with him in a torturously sad romance that happens way too fast, right? It's a gorgeous, gorgeous episode. And that's a beautiful moment for that actor. His name is Michael Obiera, all right? He's an English actor. Again, the English are doing this better than us. It's part of the BBC's policy, but writers have to remember to do it. And in America, it's really Grey's Anatomy that you have to go to see that happen. So I think that's a pretty important thing. Now, at the end of Blink, she doesn't end up with Billy Shipton. She ends up with this dude, Larry. He's a perfectly nice dude. All right, whatever. But Billy Shipton was much hotter. Now, the other thing that we talked about, and we're going to show a couple more examples, Davies is very big on feminism, right? Again, whether that was because as a gay man he didn't feel that he was included, he certainly knew from his female friends that they didn't feel that their strengths were being portrayed in television. So when he invented Torchwood, he invented Gwen for us, and I mentioned this before. Gwen and her husband Reese. Reese is the guy who stays home and waits for his cop wife to come back from work and worries about whether she'll end up dead. That is supposed to go the other way around, right? The girl stays home and wonders about her cop husband. That's not what's going to happen in Torchwood, and it makes Gwen a very powerful character. But this, again, wasn't a one-time deal for Russell. All through the course of Doctor Who, he gave us female starship captains, much better ones than Star Trek gave us, all right? Star Trek gave us Captain Janeway with her flaming hair. Right? Every time she had something to do, she took that ponytail off and did that flippy thing. That's not what Captain Kirk never flipped his hair, all right? So even though they made her a female captain, she had these ridiculous attributes. Here, the women that we're going to meet, Kathleen McConnell is from 42, episode 42. And my particular favorite, Adelaide Brooke, who is the captain in Waters of Mars. Very, very important women, very powerful women, women in charge of making decisions and saving people's lives and sacrificing their own sometime in order to do that. These are captains the way we've expected to see captains as men. And Russell wrote them as female characters. And I think that so feminism is a huge theme that wanders through Russell Davies' work. And again, that I think draws a newer, younger audience to him. Because we're ready for that. We're ready to understand that with women in the military all around the world. We don't need to see, "Oh, I'm so worried, please save me." Who believes in that, right? So feminism is a big thing that Russell gives us, which I think is important. Then obviously, as we talked about, Martha Jones gets to be both a feminist and an African American. English woman of African descent. That was my joke last time. She can't be African American. She's from the UK, all right? So English woman of African descent who is very smart, an intern, about to be a doctor, saves the world and saves the Doctor a few times. Without her, he would die. That makes that character extremely important to this universe, right? All created by our guy. And really, the final thing, and he never forgets his themes. Even a little momentary joke he's going to use to throw in an idea. In Sarah Jane Adventures, which is, as I said, quite a fun show, in one episode Matt visited, and this is Jo Grant, who was a companion back in the 70s. She was a companion early to the third Doctor. She guest stars on this episode, and at one point she's discussing her family and where they're at right now, what they're doing, because she's telling the Doctor, because he remembers her, obviously. And it turns out her grandson couldn't be with her at this event because he's marching with gay dads in England, because his dad's a gay man. Just with that little line, hello, like it's absolutely normal for this to be what's happening in her life, not a blink of an eye. This is totally cool. So Russell Davies' themes are pretty prominent throughout the course of his tenure on the show. And I think that they're pretty strong themes. Funny thing is, we get around to, hey, who knows who this guy is? Oh, somebody recognize him. You might recognize him here. Unquiet Dead, who's that? In the Unquiet Dead, that's Charles Dickens. The other picture was the actual Charles Dickens, just in case you need to know, all right? When we get around to thinking about Stephen Moffat, I think one of Stephen Moffat's major themes is that he sees the world as a fable, as a story being told, in which we are portraying characters that may or may not have control over where our story goes, right? And I have Dickens up here because his quote was, "In a utilitarian age of all other times, it is a matter of grave importance that fairy tales should be respected. Everyone who has considered the subject knows full well that a nation without fancy, without some romance, never did, never can, never will hold a great place under the sun." So fairy tales and stories have been very important to civilization across time, right? And in Moffat's reign, I believe he shows that. He gives that to us often, often, often. Who are these guys? Famous fable writers? The Brothers Grimm, right? So storytelling has been prominent in human history for a long time. This dude, anybody know him? Who recognizes him? He's Stephen Fry. What does he have to do with Doctor Who? He's never guested on the program. He's never done anything like that. However, I disagree with him. That's why his picture's there. He said, when he described Doctor Who in the media, and he was talking about Doctor Who and Merlin, actually, "They're very good children's programs. Don't get me wrong. They're wonderfully written, but they are not for adults." And I disagree. I think that Stephen disagrees. I think that he believes fairy tales and fables have things to teach grown-ups. And so he treats his characters in that fashion. So as much as I have Stephen and all the many things he's done, I disagree. Now, Stephen says this to us in almost every one of his episodes. This is when they're discussing "We'll See You Again." This is a second appearance of the Weeping Angels. "I'll see you again when the Pandorica opens." And the answer is from the Doctor, "That's a fairy tale. And according to River Song, aren't we all?" That's a lovely little, that's how I see the world. All of us are part of a story. And we have the power to make the story that we want to make, which I think is Stephen's message. So we see that often in his work. Vincent, which is one of my favorite episodes as well. Now we're moving into Matt Smith's territory. Beautiful episode where they encounter Vincent van Gogh in the last year of his life. Now, this was a dangerous territory for a writer because you can't fix Vincent van Gogh. All right, we all know he suffered from mental illness. We're not going to show children that the doctor dances into your life and mental illness goes away. That's not how it works. So that would be a lie. He wouldn't want to lie to children. It reminds me of the reason that Robin Williams did the movie Mrs. Doubtfire many years ago, if you saw that when you were a kid. When he was offered that movie, he said he would only do the film if in the end of the film, he and Sally Field did not remarry. Because he was a divorced man, and he didn't want his children to believe the fable that even if they wanted their parents to get together, it's not going to happen. That's not the real world. We need to learn to live in this new creation of our relationship. So, same thing, how do you deal with Vincent van Gogh and do something nice to him? And as you all know, there's that gorgeous moment in the end where they bring Vincent van Gogh to the present, and he gets to see that despite his tortured life, he's considered the greatest artist of all, and he stands in the middle of a beautiful museum, and he sees all of his paintings being respected, and you're just crying because it's wonderful! And it's Amy who brought that. Very nice. So, again, the fable of Vincent van Gogh, but an adult fable. We're not taking it to children's level. We're making it a grown-up level. The other fable that Stephen plays with, I think very interestingly, is the concept of the fairy tale marriage, the fairy tale wedding. First of all, he gives us the first married couple to travel in the TARDIS, which is a really, 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 really cool thing to provide. And it's a really interesting marriage, right? We're going to have Amy, we're going to have Rory. First of all, what does he call Rory? What's Rory's name? Rory Pond. But that's Amy's last name. That's not his last name. But once they get married, the Doctor continuously refers to him as Rory Pond. And when Rory argues about that, he says, "Give it up. That's true. That's who you are." And Rory accepts it. You're right. As a matter of fact, it doesn't really matter who changes their name. Why does she have to change her name? It's a ridiculous old habit for, So that's one. So Stephen has been hit with the idea that he's a misogynist. And I see some evidence of that, but then I see this other argument against it. And so I find it a very interesting dance that he seems to be playing. But by giving us Rory and Amy, he's showing us a working marriage where the woman happens to be more dominant than the man. She's more adventurous. They're of equal intelligence, but really Rory should be smarter than her because he's trained to be a nurse. She really has no formal training, right? She didn't go to college. She had all that crazy stuff happen because she saw the doctor when she was a little girl. So I think it's very interesting, the balance that he strikes here, and also the fact that Rory is always strong emotionally for Amy. And that's the power that he has in that relationship. And that's Stephen Moffat's vision of what a real marriage should be. Interestingly enough, he and Sue Virtue, who helped produce these episodes and produces Sherlock with him, that's his wife. So they are of equal importance in their particular professional world. She has the power to greenlight his work and to make it come to fruition, to protect his work from the network, right? So he gets the vision he wants. They're a very important team. So I tend to see that there is more, oddly enough, feminism in Stephen Moffat than is necessarily always recognized, mostly because of them. I will grant you, I don't understand why when they stop traveling with the doctor, she becomes a perfume model. I don't get that at all. But I get the marriage. I think the marriage works very well. And the other thing that Stephen is willing to do, which is a level above where Russell went with his couples and things, is Stephen talks about sex. His characters have sex on the TARDIS. We know that because they have a baby. But they talk about wanting to go have sex in their room. Oh my God, that's like a huge wow. Healthy, normal, married people have really good sex. Or why did they get married in the first place? Right? That's a big step, I think, in Stephen's work and what he's providing. Now, the other thing I think Stephen does a really interesting job of is looking at the world through children's eyes and treating children as very important creatures. Now, especially in a show originally geared for children, he's now using the children as major characters. Obviously, when we meet Amy Pond, we meet her at the age of 7. We don't meet her as a grown-up, right? He does that marvelous time travel hopping that no other writer did before. I do believe Stephen plays with the concept of the show much better. He allows this. If you could time travel, wouldn't you go back and tell yourself not to date that jerk? Why would you not use the popularity? Really? So he allows his characters to do that. So, but it's significant that in the very first episode that Matt Smith is introduced to us, he meets Amy as a child. And he promises the child that he will take her on a trip around the world and to see the universe, right? Then it's his own miscalculation that he shows back up and she's already 24 years old. But he plays with the necessary considerations that should be made to children. And I think that's a very interesting aspect of his writing. Go back to one of his first episodes, again, under Russell's executive producership, Empty Child. Love Empty Child. Really a brilliant piece of writing. It's about the children and the children's deprivations during World War II. How awful it was to be a child when the bombs were dropping and there wasn't food. In this case, the girl Nancy, who's about, 19 in this? No, a little older. She goes into the homes of people when the bomb raids happen and people have to leave their house and go to the bomb shelters. She sneaks in their houses and steals their food and gives it to children on the streets who have lost their parents so they have something to eat. So she is a very significant character, and her job is to care for other children, which is a significant thing that she's providing. So I think that's really fun. Obviously, that's in Eccleston's reign. And then when he gave us his Christmas episode with Michael Gambon, so we have a little Harry Potter, Doctor Who tie-in, we're here to take care of this old man and to make him a nice guy again. And to do that, he doesn't understand how bad he is until he sees himself in a flashback and a child tells him. It's a child who highlights to this grown man what's wrong with him. And he takes that child seriously, and then above and beyond that, his older self had thrown a rock and hit the kid because the kid was annoying him. And when he stops himself from harming the child, that's the cycle being broken in the mistake that creates the other unhappy parts of his life. That's a huge plot moment, and it's all turned on how one grown-up treats a young child. I think that's a pretty significant message that Stephen is putting out there. Now, I laugh because I think between these two writers, it's all about heart. It's all about being interested in the emotions of these characters. That's what writers do. The best stuff is not about the fancy monsters and the explosions and all that stuff. It's about watching human beings learn to feel and to be comfortable with their feelings. And that's what both of these writers, I think, do very well. Inside the trappings of everything else that they're trying to do, I think that really shows up. And I think that's the last thing I intend to say about the two of them. I don't pick between the two. I probably tend to like Russell a little better because he wears his emotions on his sleeve. I think writers need to do that. I think men need to do that in the modern world to make them the kind of men that modern women want to be around. And I think by watching programs like this and seeing empathy displayed in this fashion, I think that it teaches them that this is a new model of how women are looking at men. So to me, that's the most important thing that's happened with the new Who these days. And why, we'll have to see what happens with Clara. I don't know if I like her yet. But I haven't seen her do anything as deeply emotional as when she died in that first episode, and that just didn't work for me. So as far as I'm concerned, those are the two most important people. Yes, I love to see who the new character is. I'm excited to see the work Peter Capaldi will do. But I think when you watch, we're going to continue, of course, to see Stephen's messages come through Peter's mouth. Because it's not the actors changing that changes the program. It's the writers changing. That's when the messages change. And so we need to pay more attention to who's writing this media that we're bringing into our life, where they're coming from, and do we agree with what they have to say. That, to me, is what makes any new media, whether it's a movie or a television show, worth our attention. And my joke is you can find messages in anything. I work a lot in Doctor Who. That's why I have these different books that I've been in. But my new thing is I'm working on The Monkees, which some of you may know, which is a 1960s television program about 4 dudes who are rock and roll singers, and they actually became a band. It was very funny. And I laugh at that because to do a book on something that seems so frivolous, but when you look deeply at the different episodes, I had to discover who the writers were, what their themes were, and it turned out for a silly little TV program about cute boys dancing and singing, they were anti-war, they were pro-feminism, they had many messages they were delivering to the preteen audience that watched them. And I think that's something important to pay some attention to. Think about the programs that you watched even when you were younger. I think it's going to be interesting to watch my son, he's 16 now, grow up. Because when we were kids, we watched the Brady Bunch, where the cool people were the cheerleaders. Marsha Brady was a cheerleader, and her friends were all popular. But when my son was watching TV, little kid TV, about 10, 12 years ago, Jimmy Neutron was king. The dude with the brain is the dude that you want to hang out with. And the cool kid was the dorky guy in the corner. I forget his name, with the hair all the time. So that message has been embedded in his childhood, right? Or the Powerpuff Girls. Who didn't watch the Powerpuff? I love them, all right? I think that's, so what did that tell children? What has that changed in you guys' generation? Because you saw those people as the focus of a story. And so it made those focuses acceptable in your own life. So we can find a lot of messages in television, and that's why I think it's important to watch what we're watching and decide if those are messages we want to take in. Sometimes you get into a show and you suddenly realize, I don't want to spend time with this kind of person. I don't want this message banged into my head. I want something positive. And really, I do like Walking Dead. It's a well-written show, but I prefer Doctor Who. Thank you very much for coming today. It was great.